Hello, I'm Casti Quistorp, Executive Director of Klamath Film, and you just watched Soldier, a film about the world of PTSD and soldiering on through these struggles. With us today is Justin Zimmerman. He is the producer and director of the film Soldier. Thank you so much, Justin, for being here today and for being a part of the Klamath Independent Film Festival.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a cool film festival, and I'm delighted to be here.
Great. So I hear a big congratulations is in order. Soldier did just win the recent award for short documentary at the Wyoming International Film Festival.
That's correct. Yeah.
So yeah, what has the reception been like of Soldier, and has it kind of reached what you were expecting to, or getting the story across and that you set out to tell?
It's interesting. It's probably the hardest film I've ever made over 20 years, and the way that I had originally conceived of the film, it actually turned out to be considerably different. And so when I had to kind of reframe what I was trying to do and how I was actually trying to construct the film, I made it as kind of straightforward and linear as possible, which wasn't my original intent, and to just focus solely on Daniel's voice and to keep it as raw and intimate and real as he is. And so I knew that that was going to be a kind of a different documentary than a lot of people are used to. And so it's been really amazing. I've only seen it now. I mean, it's still very new. I've only seen it two times in the theater so far. After a year plus of filming and editing, sound mix, color correction, and just a powerhouse to see with a group of people who just kind of get sucked into his story and then just kind of follow through with him. But I've also found that a number of film festivals have either declined it or have informally reached out to me and said it's powerful. We're even thinking about building a program just around it, next year, but we can't find a place for it in our film festival, which I find, I guess, complimentary and also a little sad, because I think it is a film that, even though it is intense film, I think it is a film that deserves a place um, uh, in any film festival. It's actually interested in dealing or investigating that kind of character and that kind of topic. So thank you again for the invite.
Absolutely, and it does feel like a standalone film on its own, and just something where the story is so powerful and the message is so important. Especially now, just to tell that story and have people know that there are other people out there, and kind of sharing that perspective. So that is interesting to hear for sure, and we're really excited to be showing it. But how did you meet Daniel, and how did this film kind of come about?
It's interesting. I'll try to do the short story version. So I've been a professor and a filmmaker for about 20 years, but a comic book creator for about 10. And Daniel actually met me at a writers conference where I was teaching, because he's a writer as well. And he had some pieces of short fiction, which were very nonfiction based, and became very evident very quickly that he had this time in the world, and then now was a firefighter and an EMT, and just was just really enjoying writing. So we became friends because we both had a lot in common, and we are both really interested in the art of writing. And he's such an interesting guy. But one of the very first times we were sitting down in a coffee shop, and he got a text that one of his friends had taken a motorcycle and driven it off a cliff. And he just said, this is just, it just keeps happening to me. And I was like, wow, there's a story here, but I wasn't quite sure how to get into it or how to be involved in that kind of process at all. Then some amount of time later, he started getting into armored combat. He was like, Justin, you need to come down and film this and take pictures. It's so crazy and cool. And I'm not the biggest fan of like people like smashing each other with things. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. It's neat. And then one day I suffered a loss, and I was walking around very early in the morning, just kind of dealing with that. And weirdly, it just kind of struck me: what if instead of trying to tell a story about this issue, tell a story about Daniel and see how this new form of being a soldier might fit into his story? And that's really where I just called him up that day, and I said, I think I have this idea, and I think this is going to take a year, but whenever I say I'm gonna do something, I finish it. Will you take this journey with me? And he said yes. He and his family said yes, and then from then on, I mean, in the middle of COVID with no vaccines yet, figuring out how to shoot safely and how to shoot, how to make everybody comfortable and how to strip down crew, and just through this process, made this film. So yeah, it's been a journey.
Absolutely, yeah, and what an interesting way to meet Daniel, and wow, that's really fascinating and such a direct way how just meeting someone can totally change kind of where you were headed or where you're going and the stories that you tell. But yeah, that kind of segues into my next question. I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but what were some of the obstacles or challenges over the past 2 years of filming this, either creatively or logistically?
Yeah, I mean, here's the biggest challenge. I wrote 5, maybe 6 grants for this film. I have been making films, like I said, for 20 years, social oriented documentaries. This seemed like a very pertinent topic. We had a ton of amazing people involved at every step of the process, and I didn't get a single grant. In fact, I had another informal conversation with someone who said that it was one of the best. I mean, I had shot stuff, I was working on things. It wasn't a pie in the sky idea, like it was happening. They said that it was one of the best grant proposals they'd ever received, but it was too controversial of a topic to be able to be funded. And I think that, not to say that everything I do is perfect or great, but the idea that something like this, which is simply a person's story that represents so many other stories, and in the fact that he is talking about trauma, not even in terms of military, though it's obviously a big part of the film, but also in terms of just his upbringing and being a person. It just was absurd. So I had this larger idea where I would follow the armored combat team, and I would punch in, throughout the course of the journey with these different things, and I just wasn't getting any help. So crowdsource funding has helped and continued to help. You can go to soldierdocumentary.com and check out the campaign right now. The fact of the matter is that the film was put together through the blood, sweat, tears, and just commitment of a small group of people to make sure that something powerful came out of it. And that's where I was talking about restructuring it. So I was pretty down on myself about this. I was trying to figure out how I could make this thing in my head come to life. And one day it just again suddenly came to me, instead of trying to make a concert film, why don't you make an unplugged film? Instead of a gigantic performance, why don't you make it an intimate kind of unplugged coffee shop, raw, real, straightforward, and focused. And as soon as I came to that realization, I completely restructured the idea of how the film was going to be created, edited, how I was even going to put together the interview footage and photography, and just worked backwards from the idea that it would feel like you sit down with somebody, you ask them a couple questions, they tell you their story, you leave, they leave, and then life goes on. And that's how the film became what it is today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely an intimate portrait of Daniel, and you feel like you're there talking with him. I'm so curious. You mentioned the concert versus the unplugged version. So, what was that concert vision that you had originally had for the film? Because it's just so, I mean, for lack of a better word, just like wonderful the way that it is. And so, I'm curious what the vision was first.
So, I mean, folks will see this after they've seen the film, so they'll know that, so one of my last documentaries was a feature length film called Smart, and it's about this extreme animal rescue team. It's in distribution, so you can see on Amazon or iTunes. But it builds up. You get to know the characters, and you go through their story, and you live their lives, and then the conflicts start to kind of really truly seep in. So you see you see the struggle through the eyes of the characters, not yourself watching, if that makes sense. And that was my idea for Soldier as well. I Not only is Daniel an incredible individual, I mean, the number of historical events he was part of, like an MMA champion. He was in the last joint Chinese American rescue operation, recovery operation in Tibet for World War II bombers. I mean, all this stuff, like, he's lived this life, and all that was going to become part of this larger tapestry of here's this man, here's this team, because there's some really amazing people on the team. I'm glad I got some of the shots of them in the film. And we'll parallel the journey of this team with his individual journey and kind of use that as a framework. A great documentary that I love is called Murder Ball, is a great example of that idea if you've ever seen it. Um, and it's about paraplegic wheelchair rugby. And I felt like there was a lot in common here. But again, just to come back to the idea of all of that extra stuff just wasn't going to be possible. I'd still be making that film today. I'd still be trying to raise money for that film today, and I'd still be filming that film today. And so as all those resources were kind of pulled away from me on the grant front, I decided, well, I'm going to tell the story that only I can tell, and I'm going to focus specifically on. And again, I mean, I hate hearing my own voice, so the fact that my voice is in it's like very rare in 20 years of films to hear my own voice, but there I am at a couple of seminal points in the documentary, kind of leading it along. And it starts literally with us sitting down with him, putting down the boom, getting all the equipment ready, and then we go. So none of that was, let's say, part of the original plan.
Absolutely. And sometimes you just have to put yourself in the film, and that's just kind of how it ends up playing out. But that's interesting that in your 20 years of filmmaking that that is not something that
Oh.
you've usually done. So I'm assuming you've been in contact with Daniel since filming,
Oh,
and
yeah.
how is he doing?
Yeah, I mean, Daniel lives a really interesting life. His farm is going well. He's now become kind of a public speaker, which is kind of amazing. And he's still a firefighter and EMT. And he still faces discrimination, and he still faces workplace nonsense, and he's dealing with that in real time. And there are things that are going on in his life that continue to evolve. And I'm very fortunate that we are great friends to this day, and we talk, pretty much every week. So I've got his back, and he has mine.
That's amazing. That's great. Well, after hearing his story and sharing his story, what do you hope people who maybe can relate, who have been through similar things, take away from the film? And also in the same vein, who maybe haven't had those struggles or that similar story, what they can take away from it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple of things. One, I just wanted to make, because we're so terrible at listening to each other, I just wanted to make a film where you feel like you're sitting down and just listening to somebody talking. It's not really a part of our culture anymore, which is too bad. So just even the DNA of the film is about that idea. The film is also 22 minutes long, which is, and working backwards, I constructed at that length because that's the average number of veterans who take their own lives every day. So that also is baked into the film itself, something to think about and consider. But on a human level, the idea is that you can have a sense of purpose. You can have a sense of purpose that drives you, and that can be great. That can be a wonderful thing, to do things for others, or to make something happen, or whatnot. But if there's no self care, if there's no self love, if there's no sense of self, if that purpose gets taken away, you're lost. And so that's Daniel's big, I think, lesson, which is that be careful that you don't just live your life around purpose. Think about yourself and who you are, and take care of yourself in the meantime too. And you find that he still found another sense of purpose and soldiering in his family and his team, but he has a sense of self awareness, which is so critical to actually being okay no matter what happens. And that, I think, is a huge, huge issue, of course, when it comes to our veterans. But it is a trauma, a loss, PTSD. These are universal. And it was very important for him to make sure that his story was universal in that sense, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had mentioned the crowdsourcing and the website and how you funded it. So what is next for the project or for any more upcoming films that you have coming on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I will submit to 100 film festivals, give or take, with this film, and we'll see how many we get into. I am trying to either get myself or someone from the team out to every film festival if at all possible, because it's important to be able to speak for the film. So all that takes time and money, and it's separate from my life and my work. So that's why the GoFundMe campaign kind of continues to this day. But what'll happen is I have a scene that I cut out, which would make the film, which would get the film to PBS link, and that would need some pretty extensive B-roll, archival B-roll, not fair use stuff like actual B-roll stuff. And so if I had the assistantship, then that would be what I would like to do. I'd like to finish the film for PBS length and have a air date. However, if by the end of its film festival run we do not have a partner for it, then I'm going to do what I've done with a couple other socially oriented documentaries before, which is I will put it online for free, and then it will be a tool for everybody to be able to use. I mean, even in the limited number of film festivals that we've been in so far, the reactions from public health and veterans communities have been astounding. So if it does not have a television partner, um, we will make sure that everybody has access to it for no cost.
Wow, that's amazing, and that's such an interesting aspect of it too, like the public health, and I'm, just thinking about people in our own area, in our own community, and how we could use this as a tool or use this film, and I mean, it's just such a wonderful story that does really need to be shared and told, and especially in those spaces that, you might not originally think of, so that's really wonderful. It sounds like you have a lot of great plans for the film, and I certainly wish you all the best. But thank you again, Justin, so much for your time. Do you have any final thoughts on the film, this subject, or anything else you'd like to say?
No, I mean, I think it takes amount of bravery to tell people that you need help, and so we should respect and understand that for sure. But I think that Daniel is such a remarkable individual because he's self-aware, he's articulate, and he is honest. And if someone like that could get to that place, then absolutely anybody can. So ask for help if you need it.
Absolutely. What a beautiful last message. And just sharing kind of that vulnerability, especially with people who we view as very strong and very, we all need help. So asking for it when we need it. But thank you again, Justin, and thank you so much for being part of the Klamath Independent Film Festival.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.